Welcome to Portsmouth Friday Review. This week we're talking about the presidential election.
Okay. First we're going to talk about the Democratic nomination, as that's the more open of the two left. The Republican one being decided basically is going to be Trump, or it's going to be someone that the Republican Party just comes up with on a loose end and they're just going to throw it in there. So with the Democratic Party nomination, there is still quite a lot of states still to go. So as you can see, the yellow states are the ones which have voted already for Hillary, and the green ones are those who have voted for Bernie. So if you look at it, Hillary's got quite a clear lead in terms of the amount of states that she's won. But we've got quite a lot of big states coming up, like California, the largest amount of delegates in that state, which is the amount of votes it goes towards the nomination. But that's really the only thing left. California is the confirmation for Hillary. Now, there have been some predictions that Bernie could win by 65, well, he could get 65% to 35%, or, but whether that's going to happen is, you never know. And he's picked up recently a win in Indiana, the most recent state, to vote in the Democratic nomination. But whether that's going to actually help him, because he needs to get over 70% of the rest of the pledged of the delegates in the states left to vote in order to be able to get the nomination. And that's really unlikely, because California is probably one of the most liberal states, the one which is most pro-Bernie. If he's only able to get 65% in that, he's basically effectively dead. But we never know, I think it's perfect. The Democratic nomination is basically done. So if we're going to quickly go over it, just to recap, if you don't know. So there are basically two different types of delegates. There are pledged delegates, which are those from the states which have already voted. And there are also super delegates, which are people like Bill Clinton, people that think, oh yeah, they're a really good Democrat, let's give them a vote. But it's only meant to be in sort of crises that we actually, say, okay, yeah, you actually have a say. So when we look at this number of 2,205 compared to 1,401, that's actually quite a big, larger gap than there is actually in reality, because as soon as, if Bernie gets more of the pledged delegates, I think it will switch over to him, because they have to accept the will of the people. Now, it's very unlikely that Clinton's going to not get the nomination now. She's won New York, huge state, and as you can see, she's pretty much nearly there. She only needs about 2,000, and she's going to get that, however badly she performs, I'm pretty much certain. The only chance of that not happening is if the FBI indict her for her emails, because basically she used her personal email account when she was Secretary of State, or whatever the title's called, which is basically like the Foreign Minister of the U.S. And I'm not really too sure why she would get indicted for it. There's quite a lot of, whether it's lobbying, special interests, things which are conflicting with her responsibilities. But yeah, and that's the only chance. And if you look at it, it sort of shows the political elite's influence. If you had 12 FBI officials investigating you at this stage, I think any ordinary American would be thinking they're going to get convicted. From Hillary Clinton, maybe not. Too long. Right, so we'll now go on to the Republican nomination.
So
do you want to talk to us about the background?
A bit more simple for the Republican nomination, which is surprising given where we were about a year ago, in that there were a lot of candidates, and Donald Trump was probably the most outspoken of them, but they're all generally very right-wing and fairly similar in policy. And now we have come to a situation where there's essentially one candidate, and Donald Trump is definitely going to become the presidential runner for the Republican Party. So the beginning of this week, Ted Cruz withdrew his campaign, which he previously said that he would only do if he felt that there was absolutely no way he could become the presidential nominee for the Republicans, so he clearly feels that that's something that's now happened, despite talks that if he'd have stayed in the running to become the nominee, there would be what's called a brokered convention, which is essentially where the people who run the Republican Party kind of have a revote. That's a massive simplification, but essentially the votes are sort of repooled, and it's very complicated, but that would have given Ted Cruz much more of a chance to become the nominee, that he clearly feels that that's probably not going to happen and has withdrew his candidacy. And we are now left with Donald Trump, or a guy called Paul Ryan, who honestly I hadn't heard of before about 20 minutes ago. So I think it's fairly unlikely that he's going to be elected. So we essentially have Donald Trump as the absolute definite runner for the Republican Party, and whether that's a good or a bad thing is really for America to decide when they have to elect a president.
Okay, so Paul Ryan, just to clarify, nobody really knows about the presidential candidates before they run unless you're called Donald Trump. Who'd heard of Ted Cruz 2 years ago? He was a nobody, nobody cared about him, or whatever you're going to say. Right, so Paul Ryan, you might have heard of him. He was basically the VP candidate, vice presidential running mate with Mitt Romney in 2012. Now, I'm not saying he's going to get the GOP nomination or the Republican nomination, but what they could do is give an alternative candidate which reflects their views, because basically they see Donald Trump has sort of usurped their vision of the Republican Party, and he's going to destroy them. And they're going to do whatever it takes, whether it's backstabbing their own nominee. You know, I think it's already shown by the Republican Party's ruthlessness that that is possible. So at the moment, the thing which is quite instrumental about Paul Ryan is that he's Speaker of the House of Representatives. Now, nobody's really heard of, you know, the House of Representatives over here if you're a normal person, but the important thing is that until he he allowed himself to be pressured into this role of Speaker of the House of Representatives. He is not someone who, you know, he takes quite a tactful political strategy, and I could see him being seen as a moderate candidate, which could potentially beat Donald Trump. Now, what's going to happen? This is the dilemma. Is it going to be a two-party system in this election? Is it going to be Trump versus Clinton? Now, that's uncertain because, of course, you have you know, small parties like the Libertarians, but you could see things like Paul Ryan going. You know, I don't know how they construe his affiliation to the Republican Party if it was like alternative candidate or something. But it is possible. And if he does that, why not have two Democrat candidates? Why not Bernie Sanders as an independent? And that is the major question that we're looking at in this election, and whether it's going to be a major multi-party system. Thanks for watching.